Snowden's documentary or the brilliant portrayal of the unethical pursuits in Anonymous, cybersecurity has intrigued mankind for long. A world in its own, the cybersecurity sphere continues to be an oblivious existence to many of us. A very warm welcome to the ones on the other end listening to me, all geared up for today's episode of the webinar series on the topic Careers in Cybersecurity. They say the more the system we secure, the more secure we all are. I hope the gravity of the statement has alerted you to the direction you are soon to be pulled in. To guide you through the path and enlighten you all more about the opportunities that lie behind, I'd like to call upon the speaker for today's webinar, Ms. Akaanksha Sinha, or as she prefers to keep it short and crisp and be acknowledged as AK. Hi, AK.
Hey guys.
Hope you're doing good.
So much.
AK currently serves as a project manager of security shared operations services at the multinational technology company IBM, a globally renowned alma mater of yours truly, the NorthCap University. She went on to pursue masters in computer and information system from the Baruch College, New York. AK has further accomplished a certification in her concerned field from the prestigious Harvard University. The lady has a series of recognition added under her name, from being placed as an associate at Deloitte and succoring as a graduate assistant in the University of New York to the position she presently governs. Trust me, guys, AK is a trailblazer to the women attending the session today, who someday aspire to have their names honored in the technical province. So without any further delay, let's hear it out from the woman of the hour herself, presenting next on the screen to you, Ms. Akaanksha Sinha, Urf AK. And just before you begin, AK, a slight instruction from my end to all the attendees who are attending this webinar. Kindly post your questions in the chat box there. They will all be answered. They will all be entertained by the speaker of our event at the end of her presentation. The stage is yours. The virtual stage is all yours, AK.
Thank you, Aditi, and thank you so much for those really kind words. So welcome, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you for joining us from whatever part of the world you're joining us from. Today, we're going to talk about cybersecurity and what is the skill gap in cybersecurity that we have, and the different types of careers you can do. And later, throughout the presentation, we're going to go slightly deeper into one of the domains of cybersecurity. And at the end, we're going to go for some question and answers. So let's talk about what cybersecurity is. Cisco defines cybersecurity as a practice of protecting systems, networks, and programs from digital attacks. These cyber attacks usually affect the confidentiality, availability, or the integrity of the system. Now, this CIA format usually is referred to as the cybersecurity triad. Now, why is cybersecurity so important? The reason it is so important is that in the past few decades, it's become extremely inefficient for us to implement cybersecurity measures, because the number of devices are growing at an exponential rate compared to the number of people that we have. And the attackers are becoming more sophisticated. They're becoming more innovative in trying to access the data from your systems, from your computers, organizations, and so on. So moving on to talking about why we have a skill gap, or what is the skill gap that we have today. So as you guys can see on the screen, IC Square has come up with a recent study that talks about the skill gap across the globe. As of the latest data points, there are 4.07 million cybersecurity positions that are open, which means there are 4.07 million jobs and we don't have the people to fill it. Talk about job security at this point. And as you guys see here, we have the highest impact is in the Asia Pacific region, approximating to about 2.6 million cybersecurity skills required. That sums up to 64% of the total skill gap. The next you have North America with 14%, or Latin America at 15%, North America at 14%, and then you have Europe at 7%. Now, once we talk about the cybersecurity skill gap, this is a global scenario of everybody included. Let's talk about the skill gap in women. As of today, the latest study that was conducted by IC Square, there are only 24% women in the cybersecurity workforce, which means it's only a quarter of the workforce that has women in cybersecurity positions. Now, while this is an up of 13% from 9 years ago, but over a decade, only 13% of increase is not a good progression of including or increasing the cybersecurity workforce. And therefore, we are here today to talk about cybersecurity skill gap across the globe, so I can help educate the young minds that are about to graduate and tell them about the different opportunities that are here in your that are here and available for you to work on. So let's talk about what are the different careers in cybersecurity you can talk about. When it comes to any system or an organization or a enterprise, there are three main components you can divide that into. There's a people component, a process component, and a tool component. Now, you as a cybersecurity professional can choose to have a career in the people aspect, in the process aspect, or tools. Now, for example, something in the process aspect would be talking about how to set up secure processes where your enterprise can work, or whatever company that you're working for can function and deliver the same deliverables that you've promised as part of your business outcomes, and yet make sure that those processes are secured. When you talk about people, you talk about the people that are touching, the humans that are touching these systems. How do you protect their data, their information, and also how do you protect your systems from these people? What about if I want to access a system and I am only supposed to have read access, and somebody in the organization needs to make sure that AK doesn't have the capability to do more than read access? And that is where the people component comes in. Now, when you talk about tools, is an array of tools in cybersecurity that you can specialize in, you can work on. There are tools for network scanning, there are tools for identifying vulnerabilities. You have multiple domains that you can go into. Now, when we talk about going into a particular cybersecurity domain, when you see on the right side of my screen over here, there's a concept called the T-bar. Now, what the T-bar talks about is you can go as broad as you want in the cybersecurity domain. So you could have different domains under your belt, like ethical hacking, network security, risk assessment, application security, and so on and so forth. There are tons of domains that you can specialize, that you can work on and get experience in. Now, what the bar of the T that we talk about is how deep do you want to go into that particular domain. You can go as deep as you want, and for those of us who are attending here who have a background of computer security, they can probably identify with the TCP/IP model. Now, if you want, let's say in network security, you could go as deep as you want, all the way down to the network access level, or you can go on the internet. You can talk about the security between two hosts. You can talk about security between applications communicating through the internet and on the application layer, and so on and so forth. Today, we're going to go a slightly deeper into the risk management domain of the T-bar. So what is risk management? Today, we're going to talk about the definitions that are most common under risk management. We're going to talk about what the risk management lifecycle is, and then we're going to see a small snippet of what a risk assessment report looks like. So talking about definitions. Now, the first thing when you come to cybersecurity as a fresher, the most common terminologies that you hear are things like threats, vulnerabilities, threat actors, risk, and so on and so forth. So let's talk about what a threat is. A threat is nothing but a negative event that can lead to an undesired outcome and can cause damage or loss of an asset. A threat could become more dangerous because of a particular vulnerability in a system, or it could, be less dangerous, but it's a threat to your system. Now let's talk about what are the different examples of threat. Now, you could say a fire that happens in your data center is a threat to you. You could say a hacker trying to get into your systems or your enterprise is a threat to you. Even your friend who is slyly watching over your shoulder to see your passwords is a threat to you as an individual. And then there are other threats like floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, so on and so forth. Now, when you talk about threats, what are the actors that are causing the threats? What are threat actors? Threat actors are basically elements that cause the threats, which means these could be a human, like your friend that we just talked about that's trying to get into your social media like Instagram or Snapchat. It could be a hacker who's trying to get into your systems from outside. It could also be nature. When we talk about floods, we talk about fire, we talk about earthquakes. These are nature's threat actors that are going to cause harm to your system. And in the end, it's going to compromise either of the three triad that we initially talked about, which is confidentiality or the integrity or the availability of your system. Now, coming to what are threats caused by? They're caused by vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities are, in the layman terms, they're technology gaps or bugs is probably a very small way of saying it, but there's gaps in your system that enable your system to be threatened by that particular threat. So an example of these items could be things like, excuse me, cross-site scripting, SQL injection. You could transfer plain text passwords over the internet, and so on and so forth. Vulnerabilities are the weaknesses that are taken advantage of by the threat actors to do what they're trying to do, and therefore cause threat to your systems or your network or your enterprise. So moving on. Now, once you know what threat and vulnerabilities and threat actors are, what are they going to cause to you? Now, that is a risk. A risk, by the English language definition, is the likeliness of an event happening. That event could be positive or a negative event. Now, when we talk about cybersecurity, usually these events or the risk connotation of the risk is mostly negative, as a result of which the definition for cybersecurity and the risk changes to, excuse me, I apologize. The definition of the risk in cybersecurity changes to the likeliness of an undesired event happening. And this is usually quantified by the probability of an event happening, of a negative event happening times the impact that that negative event is going to cause to your system. So moving on and going through a recap of what we just learned. A threat is a negative scenario you want to avoid. A threat actor is the agent that makes that threat happen. A vulnerability is a weakness that can be exploited in order to attack you. A risk is a negative scenario you want to avoid combined with its probability and its impact. And the difference between a threat and a risk is a threat is a negative event by itself. However, the risk is a negative event combined with its probability and its impact. Now, what do you do as an individual once you identify what a risk is? You know what your risks in your system are. What do you do about them? In the enterprise or in the industry, that is known as risk management. Now, when you're trying to manage risk, you can do a few things with the risks that you have identified. You could either accept it, which means you know that, okay, I know what the problem in my systems are. I know I can fix them, not now, but maybe in 6 months. So I'm going to accept the risk that is going to cost to my business and try and fix it in the next so many days. The next is you can mitigate it, which means, okay, I know what's the problem with my system, and I'm going to go and fix it. The other thing you could do is transfer it. For example, if you're in an organization where you're talking about that you've identified a risk of, say, you've identified a risk of people trying to get into your employees' data. Now, you could probably transfer that risk is by hiring third-party organizations where you say, hey, my company does not have the capability to fix this, and therefore I'm going to hire you, third-party organization, and I'm going to ask you to solve this problem for me. So therefore, at this point, you're transferring the risk that you have in your organization to this third-party organization, and they say that, okay, we're going to fix it for you, or we're going to say that, okay, we take over the risk for you. A very common example of this would be cybersecurity insurance. Companies usually get insured to make sure that they can transfer the risk. We know that we're going to get attacked. We know that it is not a question of if, it's a question of when we're going to get attacked. How do we protect our systems? How do we protect our data? And how do we protect the customers and the employees that are related to our enterprise? At that point, you hire something like an insurance company who's willing to transfer the risk from your own organization to their organization in return for a monetary exchange. Now, once you identify the risk management, like what are the things you can do, we're going to now talk about a risk management lifecycle. Now, this image might look a little bit overwhelming for somebody who doesn't have any background of cybersecurity, but let's go through this, and trust me, all of this is really common sense. So when you talk about, say you've been given a project, and the project is, please go and identify the risk in my system. Or your IT department hires you and says, hey, we're going to hire you, and I need you to identify what's the risk in our system, and I need you guys to fix it. Now, what is the first logical step that you guys are going to do? The first step is you're going to go and identify the information assets. What are the systems? What are the data points? What are the data assets that we are trying to protect? So you go and take an inventory, which is usually called an asset inventory, and you go and identify what are the different types of assets that I'm supposed to protect, whether it's the network, whether it's an application, whether it's, it's computers, so on and so forth. Because logically, or the common sense, you can't protect what you don't know. Now, moving on, once you've identified what you are going to protect or what you need to protect, the next thing is you go and quantify and qualify the threats in it. As we just learned about what threats are basically negative events that can occur and cause damage to your organization. So obviously, next step, okay, let's go and see what all things can actually cause harm to us. So once you go and do that exercise, the next logical step is you go on and see what are causing those threats, right? And again, going back to the definitions that we spoke about earlier in this presentation, vulnerabilities are nothing but the things or the gaps in your system that can enable or cause your system to be threatened by a threat actor. So once you assess the vulnerabilities, once you know what's wrong, so far you've identified what you need to protect, you've identified what's being, what are the threats to those systems, and you've identified what are the things that are being caused, what are the things that are causing those threats. So logically, next step, let's go and fix them. So this process is called the remediation part, or the remediating control gaps. At this point, you go and see, okay, what are the different types of controls I can put into place? Are there primary controls? For example, can I put in a lock or a biometric lock for people trying to get into their computer? Or do I need a secondary control? For example, okay, if I cannot put in the technology, what I'm going to try and do is put in a process that, okay, anybody who's going to get a new laptop has to make sure they get the approval from their bosses and so on and so forth. So at that point, you go and remediate the control and the control gaps, and you go and fix what's wrong with your system. Now, just before we move on to the first step all over again, once you go and do this remediation process, in cybersecurity, you never achieve equilibrium. Because as we discussed earlier in the presentation, threat actors are getting more sophisticated, they're getting more innovative in trying to get into your systems. So say you fix something today, in 2 days from now or 24 hours from now, somebody else found another way to try and get into your systems. So at that point, what you do is you go and manage your residual risk. So once you've identified the information assets, you've identified, quantified and qualified your threats, you assess the vulnerabilities, you fix them, you go back and see, okay, what are the things that I fixed completely? What are the things that I didn't fix or maybe partially fixed? And what are the things that I'm still open to? At that point, you go and take the decision of the risk management concepts that we talked about. Is you either accept those risks, you either transfer those risks, or you try and mitigate them further based on the availability of technology or processes at that point. And once that is done, you start this process all over again, and you go through and this is what the risk management lifecycle is. So to give you guys an example of what the risk management lifecycle looks like is the following. So can you guys see my screen? Can you guys see the vulnerability scan assessment that we can that I'm sharing right now? Aditi, I'm sorry, just confirming. You guys can see the screen?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
All right, perfect. So moving on. So this is a sample scan assessment report that I came up with. So as you see, you've got, the overall components over here. You talk about the indices and what you have. And then usually when you're trying to do a risk assessment documentation, remember, as a security professional, you need to adjust your risk assessment document towards your audience. At this point, if your audience are executives and you go and share a risk assessment where it's an output from a tool or it's an output from a network scanning tool like OpenMass, at that point, the executives don't have enough information to make the decisions that you need so you can go and fix the vulnerabilities that you found. So at this point, try and make sure that you adjust your report according to your audience. Here in this particular example, I have adjusted this report to an audience of executives, and therefore you see a executive level view of red, green, and yellow, or red, green, and orange, where you say, hey, Miss or Mr. Executive, these are the things that I've found out, and instead of boring you with all the details, I'm going to tell you you're green in this scenario and you're red in this scenario. Once you do that, and a report usually has, like I said, an executive summary. You talk about what are the things you do, what was the scope you identified, so on and so forth. Then you assess, then you actually, in the report, you talk about what are the things you covered. Did you only cover the 5 systems we talked about? When you were doing, did your scope include more than 5 systems and the internet that those systems were on, so on and so forth. Then you talk about methodology. What did you do? How did you do it? What are the things what are the processes or what are the steps that you took? And what are the meetings you did or something of that sort, depending on the kind of audience that you have. Moving on, again, this was part of the methodology. I explained how I came through those numbers, what are the value of those numbers, so on and so forth. Once you do that, you go to the technology part of it. You talk about what are the key findings that you found when you were doing the risk assessment. You go and tell the executives that these are the risks that I found. Based on my assessment, I assess you as moderately high risk, I assess you as a medium risk, a low risk, so on and so forth. Again, these levels of assessment, there are a lot of documentations, a lot of standards in the industry available today based on which you can quantify and qualify the risk or the findings that you find, or the gaps or the vulnerabilities that you find in your enterprise and organization. Once you do that, then you talk about critical call for action. This report's objective is for you to fix something, or for the executives to make a decision so that you can fix something as that cybersecurity professional. So you go and tell them that, okay, these are the critical items we need to fix. You can split them again based on either people, process, or tools. You could split them like non-IT or IT part of it. So as you guys see here, we said in terms of non-IT, there were items like make sure you have an asset register, make sure you have a security governance council, etc., etc. And then you move on to call for action for the IT part of it. Again, this table is a combination of a tool output from OpenMass plus a mathematical computation I did to identify what are the total or the clean systems or the total number of vulnerabilities found. But depending on the type of tool you're using or depending on the type of risk assessment you're doing, you can define those critical call for action in terms of the technology part of it in such sections. Well, and then these are standard disclaimers some people put in share into their systems or not. And again, one other item that I would like to share would be this particular risk assessment is a type of risk assessment. In the industry, in the market, if you go and search, there are 1,000 different types of formats, there are 1,000 different types of assessment that you could do. And depending on the kind of systems you're working with, depending on the kind of organization you're working with, depending on the kind of audience that you're working with, you can choose what kind of risk assessment you want to conduct, what kind of report you want to provide. And in the end, you end up making and protecting the systems that you've been hired for. And that would be it from my side.
Hello. So are we prepared for the questionnaire round? Like, can we be picking up the questions now? AK?
Yeah, I'm good. Sorry.
Yeah, sure. So the first one that has been asked is by Shreyans. He asked, quantum computers will be able to break RSA encryption in future. So what is next step in cryptography? And will we ever be secure after these computers are made? For, I'm a very new person to this, so yeah, it
All
felt
right,
very...
so that's a great question. And Shreyans, trust me, it's one of the nightmares and things that keep me up at night as well, is like we discussed earlier, is the industry, the threat actors are getting more innovative and they're trying to get into your system in any way possible. Now, earlier, things that a computer could have done in 10 days, now a quantum computer can do it in 10 seconds. And therefore, in terms of your question of what is the next step in cryptography, well, so far, there are different cryptographic standards in the industry. You can talk about the RSA standard. You can talk about the EC5 standard, so on and so forth. I am not aware of the exact cryptographic ones that quantum computing has not been able to break so far, but there are portals like the ISC Square, there are portals like the FIPS, which is the FIPS standards that can keep you updated on the latest versions of the cryptographic standards of the or the encryption standards that are available in the market that have not been broken so far.
I felt like a totally third person here, so unlettered to the idea of quantum computers and cryptography. So moving on to the next question. Can we have the next question, please? Yeah, Pooja asks, which system the major branch we should have to enter into cybersecurity? SIS stands for something which I am again unlettered to. So
I think from what I gather, the question being is, in order for you to get into cybersecurity, I'm not sure if ITM or your particular organization offers those cybersecurity courses, but if they do, that's the first step. Go and take those courses. I do know there's a cryptography course, and I took that course 5 years ago when I was part of ITM. And if you're part of other universities, go and find out if there's cybersecurity courses in your colleges. And if not, you can start with the basic fundamentals. So
now NCU is offering a specialization in cybersecurity too. Pooja, you should look for the opportunity. You should grab it, definitely.
yeah,
So
and
moving on.
just to add one last thing,
Sorry to interrupt.
in case your organization, your company, your college does not offer cybersecurity courses, you could start with the basics. For example, you can start with network concepts. You can start going through how networks work, because again, cybersecurity is all about the internet. If you know how internet works, it's a one step closer to get into cybersecurity. And apart from that, there are multiple resources available on the internet, which I can share. The resources that IBM has as part of free learning, the resources that MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and other such technology universities offer as part of their outreach into the cybersecurity program and the outreach to reduce the cybersecurity gap. So what I will do is I will share these links, these resources with Aditi and the team here, so they can forward these information for these particular courses or these information.
Definitely, we would be mailing it to them, all the details that you lend us, and you answered it pretty well. Next question is by Ansh Dudeja, and he asks, Ma'am, as we know, the GET requests are less safe, still Facebook is using the GET request instead using POST. That is a Facebook technology concentration question.
Well,
So
again, I'm not sure what Facebook really uses, but if that is the case, they might have secondary controls in place or so on and so forth. But if there are something that you find like this, even whether it's for Facebook, Google, IBM, any company, all of these companies have a program called the bug bounty. If you see something, you say something, you go and reach out those two people.
okay, sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. Could you please rewind those 5 words back? I wanted to hear it again. I missed it, I guess.
Oh, so what I'm saying is every company has bug bounty programs. If not every company, but most companies have bug bounty. What a bug bounty program is, they pay you or they give you incentives or they give you prizes for you to go and find out what's wrong with their computer or with their systems from outside the world. So when you do this, you can look it up, and I might be able to provide a few bug bounty programs. And if you're interested in that kind of thing, you can definitely look up and make sure you're part of these programs, and you can help fix and make the world a much secure place.
Thank you. I was not aware of that specific word it has. And the next one is by Pooja again. You are very curious today, Pooja. Even in the economic recession, do we still have requirements in cybersecurity for freshers?
Yes, if you look up we can share this deck with everybody, and on this deck there's a reference to an IC score website. If I correctly remember, so if you look up the data points, 35% of the workforce are millennials, and about 15% are Gen Z in terms of the workforce that are here. Cybersecurity, like and this is my personal opinion, is till such time there's data, there's systems in the world, cybersecurity will be in demand. You talk about financial information, you talk about banks getting into the systems or getting their information onto the internet to make it easier for you as a customer to access. There are 1,000 different things you can figure out in how to protect that kind of communication between the bank and a customer. Same thing with computers in an organization, same thing with computers in your college. So yes, there's a huge demand for cybersecurity. Now, when it comes to freshers, again, the reason that we have the skill gap of 4.07 million people is because there are jobs, but they're not skilled people to fill those jobs. So the first thing you need to do is gather those kind of skills, whether you're doing it through your private learning, whether you're doing it through certifications, whether you're doing it through a degree course that you enroll into. You have to get those skills to fill those jobs. You can't get, even if there are information or there are jobs in the market, they won't hire you only because they don't have somebody to fill the job, right? So that's the reason that you need to make sure that you're skilling yourself, you're constantly upskilling yourself, and you keep up with the market and the market demands.
Truly answered. Now we have it from the IT guy of our university. As a full stack developer, what are the basic security measures I can apply in my application rather than having a cyber security person? He wishes
Sure.
to be an all-rounder.
So as a developer, I think one of the biggest concern, and this is one of the biggest things that all organizations deal with, is because the usual mindset is that security is not my job, is taking us down the drain as a world. And Akshay, this number one, congratulations for thinking that it is your job, and a great job, and we need more people like you. So part A. Part B, to answer your question, I would talk about secure coding practices. Make sure you read up on what are the secure coding practices available. things like parameterization is you can identify, instead of hard coding parameters into your code, you could identify a different way of making sure that those parameters are not being not being abused by people from outside. Things like make sure you don't have any backdoors open, make sure your code is safe and secure from SQL injections, make sure your code is safe and secure from cross-site scripting. Make sure that, whenever you're coding or your coding practices, before you deploy, you identify you don't have any clear text secrets in your code. You're not putting in passwords and usernames hard-coded into the system. You're enabling things like, two-factor authentication based on the kind of communication that you're setting up, and so on and so forth. So what I would suggest is there are a lot of free tools out there. And Aditi, if I could request you to, note down these requests of what are the things that we need to do. So
if
one of
it
them,
be recorded, I would be going through it again, and I would be noting it down very well. If not at the moment, I'll do it later. Don't worry about it.
So whenever Aditi is able to get back to me, I will also provide a few tools that are open source that you could use to actually scan your code for backdoors or for weaknesses or vulnerabilities that might be in your code.
The trespassing, yeah, everything. So thank you, Akshay, for your question, and thank you, ma'am, for answering so patiently. Do we have another question? Yeah, it's from Yashdeep that says, he asks, can we find online payloads for XSS?
Yep, there are tons of data sources out on the internet. You'd be surprised at the kind of things you can find in terms of cybersecurity. There are multiple forums where you can reach out to. Again, I could probably point you towards the right data sources. I might not be able to point you to the exact online payloads that you're looking for, but I might be able to point you to the sources or the legit sources or the the databases that are famous for doing these kinds of tests or assessing what your security posture is.
So again, it's a question by Pooja, and how can we enter into the cybersecurity field? It's quite in connection to what you have answered in the previous question too, about getting into the cybersecurity field through the college courses and everything. But if you wish to repeat, just a brief repetition of what you have already answered beautifully.
Sure. So again, as Aditi said, you can be into cybersecurity field today. There's a game on the internet. It's an open source game. It's called Over the Wire. It's 32 levels. It teaches you how files are protected, how files are, it's a Linux. It teaches you how to write Linux commands. You can start that today. And depending on, what kind of field, where you want to go into, what you want to do, depending on that, there are different things we can do. And, Aditi has already shared my LinkedIn details and Twitter. And you guys feel free to reach out to me if there's anything I can help out with. So, and, we can have a conversation after.
So, Animesh, we missed the question by Baldeep that was posed by Baldeep. Can we have that slide again, that message again, the question again? Yeah, sure. Thank you. Which subjects need to be learned for the cybersecurity language, for cybersecurity, like Linux and networking?
Sure. Again, same thing. You could learn Python and do security. You could do. You need to know networking to know security. You need to know Linux to know security. There are different things you need to do. So depending on your skill set, depending on the kinds of things you want to learn or you want to work into, you can make that decision. In terms of subject, again, as long as you get your fundamentals clear, understanding what cybersecurity is, how it works, it'll make it easier for you. However, even if, again, this does not mean that if you don't have a computer background, if you don't have a cybersecurity background, that you cannot be in cybersecurity. You can. I have worked with people who by degree is a fashion designer, has gone to a fashion school, and has moved into cybersecurity as a cybersecurity design person. So
that's very inspiring.
And,
for at least
that's
a
what I'm
layman
saying.
like me.
Do not be overwhelmed by the concept that, it requires a lot of technology knowledge or background. again, it's all about what you can learn. It's all about what are the sources, learning sources that you're using. Again, 4.07 million unfilled jobs. Somebody has to do them. So let's get into cybersecurity as fast as we can. Next question. Okay, that's a very good question, Rakesh. So in terms of penetration testing, when you talk about penetration testing, you're trying to penetrate a system through all the different kinds. So you could do a light penetration testing, you could do a deep penetration testing, so on and so forth. A penetration testing tells you what are the things that you can break in your system, or what are the things that are breakable in your system, which is very similar to vulnerability assessment. However, vulnerability assessment is a step after the penetration testing, where once you're done with the penetration testing, you've identified the vulnerabilities, you go and assess what kind of vulnerabilities you have. Now, connecting it back to the report that I shared, my report was a network scan result or a network vulnerability assessment result, and not a penetration test. We did not go into details of what kind of port is being. Let me rephrase. When we do a vulnerability assessment, when I did the vulnerability assessment with the network scan, it was more about, let's go and scan for these systems. What are the open gaps right now? What are the known vulnerabilities and open gaps? Penetration testing can go into, okay, we know what the known gaps are, but let's talk about what are the things we don't know. Let's try to break this particular system by doing this, or by, bypassing the internet, or by social engineering. Those are the, again, I'm mixing too many concepts here together, but that is the main difference between penetration testing and vulnerability assessment. Is when you talk about penetration testing, you try and break the system to get in, whereas vulnerability assessments are usually scans of the existing vulnerabilities into your system.
Okay, I'm back again. I missed it in between. My internet connection ditched me, and it was bound to happen. I felt it. Anyway, can we move on to the next question, please? That's by Parul Gulati. And to understand cybersecurity, is there any need to understand cryptography algorithms?
So, yes and no. If you are trying to get into a field where cryptographic algorithms are being used, if you're talking about network security, if you're talking about things like SSL, TLS, if you're talking about certificate authority, if you're trying to get into that domain, then sure. Again, the more base level knowledge, the fundamental knowledge that you have is helpful for you. It gives you a leg up from people who don't know this. So call me someone who, like, trying to mandate everything. I would say yes, but again, it's not a mandatory requirement. But if you know it, it's going to help you way more than your competition who's right next door and might not know about cryptography algorithms.
Yeah, you just stated about the fashion designer who got into this field. I guess it's someone. Now, the next question is from Aman Dhiman. I have heard many times the main job of a cybersecurity engineer is to perform bug bounties. I'm still not aware what really it is. You just talked about bug bounty. So, can you please brief it out again to him if he in case missed it?
Bug bounties are really, so what is a bounty, right? In general, in English. And actually, before I get into that, just a small tip in terms of cybersecurity. Not to oversimplify cybersecurity as a whole, but at least for the folks that are attending this webinar, a lot of the concepts in cybersecurity are exactly what they mean in English. When you talk about things like phishing, it is that I am phishing for people who are vulnerable, right? So it's a lot of the times it's pretty much it's common sense, and that if you keep it that way, the number of times that you're overwhelmed by the technology, by the broadness of this domain, it helps you in that concept. So coming back to the actual question of bug bounties are really—
Yeah, just clarify, AK, just clarify it once, else we will be mistaking it as the chocolate we used to have.
So when we talk about bounties, what is a bounty? A bounty is I as a person is giving somebody else an incentive to go and find something for me. if usually bounties are used in terms of people who are evading the law, and there are bounty hunters who go after those people and find them. Similarly, these are bug bounties. So you are becoming a bug bounty hunter to go and find the bugs into an organization. Whether it's sometimes bug bounty hunters are internal, like you said, that security engineers are asked to perform these. Sometimes it's external. For example, HackerOne, the organization, actually does bug bounties as a business model for themselves. So you can hire HackerOne as a company who hires other people across the globe to go into bug bounties for you. And therefore, these are the kind of things you can do. So you could either do it for free. There are bug bounty competitions. There are bug bounty job roles that are available in the market. There are a lot of different things, a lot of different companies that do these, and they try and incentivize these so as to make sure that people can find all the bugs available or whatever they can find, and make sure that they can secure the system.
So again, the next one is from how will we keep ourselves updated with the latest cybersecurity news? I guess
you and me, Rakesh, you and me. So, okay. So, like I said, it's very important for all of us to upskill ourselves every day. You can't be like, okay, I did my degree, I did my certifications, I'm all set for life. Nope. The technology is changing so fast every day. It's difficult to know it all. However, you can still do things that you can use and leverage technologies available in the market to make sure that you are keeping yourself updated. So there are apps, there are news articles. Put a Google alert on your computer or your phone that relates to cybersecurity. There are apps like Flipboard. There are apps like Mindset. There are apps like the multiple different apps like these that collate information from different news sources, and they provide you as one source. So from my personal opinion, Flipboard is very useful. You can select the category of news that you want to be. You go ahead and do that. You try and keep yourself updated with if you're talking about just the news, that would be more than sufficient. If you're trying, make sure you put the Google alerts in place, you do Flipboard, you do other different, on LinkedIn, you can put an alert in place, so on and so forth. And when you're talking about upskilling, again, certifications, Udemy courses, library courses, all of these courses are what are going to help you upskill yourself constantly.
Okay, and so the apps you named were Flipboard and the other one. Would you please recapitulate it for us? The apps that you named, the Flipboard and the other one that you named?
Flipboard, and the other I said was
Mine something.
Cybery. Cybery is a portal for education.
Okay, cool. And the next one is from Ansh Dudeja. Ma'am, how can we protect our domain from IDOR vulnerabilities?
So can you expand on what IDOR is? Like, we can come back because, there are multiple abbreviations in the world. So if you could expand what IDOR.
I will be doing it for you. Insecure Direct Object References. IDOR refers to Insecure Direct Object References. And he is asking to protect
I'm not a application security completely on the code side, but based on what I know of indirect object references, I would say things like make sure you parameterize, the references you're trying to do, make sure that you're not hard coding anything in your code, and make sure that, when you talk about inheritance, or you talk about you're not doing global inheritance for everything. And again, my knowledge of this domain is very limited in terms of this. So
it's totally fine. It's totally fine. We may move to the next question, and that's by Parul. She asked, "Whatever we like and share on Facebook, our data is not safe. How can we overcome that?"
Sure. So as an individual, what I would guide is making sure that whatever you post, you know what you're posting. Number one, don't just like or share unknowingly. That's all about the internet of me when you talk about yourself, you need to be very careful with the information you're sharing on the internet. Now, with the recent times, a lot of the companies, including Google, including Facebook, because we are all consumer facing, you can go into their settings, their privacy settings, their security settings, and actually look at what are the kinds of third-party ad partners you have. What kind of data is being shared about you to Facebook, to Google, to other social media sites, and what are the kinds of information that they are transferring to third parties. Privacy laws have helped all of us become much more aware. What I would suggest is go ahead, go and review those settings. Make sure what you're sharing, you know whether they're public, whether set to public or private or friends. Go and see what kind of information is available. If your birth date is available out there with the year and it is available to the public, it's going to be very easy for me to go and impersonate you or social engineer you, depending on the kinds of information you give me. I know what school you go to, I know when you were born, I know what city you lived in, I know your dog's name because you're your dog's name. I might be able to guess your password saying buddy1234.
You can plot the
I
stars.
know.
Yeah, totally, for the person.
So make sure that you know what you're
Next question is by our admin, Animesh Das.
So,
how can we practice CTF, and how is practicing CTF good for entering into MNCs?
So what does CTF stand for?
I would be just clarifying it for you. And as I said, I'm quite unlettered to the technical part. So capture the flag. It stands for capture the flag. A moment.
I don't
Wait,
think
I'm
that
sorry.
Animesh, if he's on call, he could just let us know.
Yeah, sure. He's on call, and it's cybersecurity capture the flag.
Yeah.
Yeah, slightly.
Yeah. So in capture the flag, what happens is you need to, I guess, you need to get into a website and do some kind of testing. So I'm not very sure about what it is, but I heard from one of my seniors that it is a very good practice when it comes to getting into MNC. So like, I just wanted to know who big MNCs hire on this criteria.
Okay, so again, MNCs can hire on multiple criteria. It depends if you have a skill, if you know that your skill, if you know your skill inside out. It's all about how you pitch yourself to those companies. So, Animesh, we can take this offline and we can talk more about this topic if you want, if you want to give me more details. But going back again, 4.07 million unfilled jobs because we don't have the skills. Not that we don't have the people, we don't have the skills. So skill yourself and make sure that we need you guys, man. Come on.
And to the ones placing these questions today, I really see you all as aspirants for these jobs, and the stakeholders of these jobs. I'm at a very low level to speak such things, but yeah, for me, the questions you are posing, I believe you all are capable of take holding of it. And so with this, we are ending the Q&A round. We don't have any further questions. And and I would be presenting a thank you vote to you, ma'am. Thank you vote to you, AK. Pardon me. Thank you, AK, for such a deep insight on the career prospect that this field has to offer, and a heartfelt gratitude to all the attendees who were so patient and who was so interactive. This made a very productive and a fun session. And I wouldn't be ending this webinar without raising a huge shout out to the IEEE NCU Women in Engineering team. Girls, you all are worth the hype. Kudos to the team. Thank you. This was Aditi on behalf of the NorthCap University. It was a wonderful time with you all. Like, share, and subscribe to the IEEE NCU YouTube channel. Thank you. Thank you so much.